Welcome again. My name is René Brummel. As Jan said, I'm a pretty passionate ForNAV enthusiast. I started working with ForNAV on a project last Christmas and quickly fell in love with it and somehow got in touch with the people behind it. And here I am talking to you all and presenting a webinar. So today we're going to talk about how to build a ForNAV report in just a few minutes. When most people think about ForNAV, they think about complete report conversion in 3 clicks for a good reason, because it does a brilliant job in that, and that was also the marketing message when the company started. But did you know ForNAV has a designer that completely matches the NAV DNA? Simple, intuitive, and it allows you to create a report in just a few minutes. Because the ForNAV designer is built specifically for NAV, it understands the NAV design patterns and allows you to do things you can only dream of before. ForNAV is designed with Dynamics NAV in mind, so it understands flow fields and group totals. There's no need to create complex queries in SQL. Even the dataset in NAV does not need to have any fields defined. I hope that makes you curious. Big question, of course, today is how do I create a report? And as you can see, I have opened the ForNAV designer. You can download the ForNAV software at www.fornav.com, and you will get the same version I'm working with here. I'm actually working on a trial version which gives you all the capabilities, but just has a little trial version thing in the previews and the printed reports. So first thing we need to do is set up the ForNAV designer and NAV to work together. And to do that, we need to download the ForNAV objects. We click New, and we can select either a new report from a template, or we can download the ForNAV report pack. If we do that, we can state a starting object number. I've got a developer's license in my NAV database at the moment. So I'll start at 70,000, which is free. Menu suite, I'm using NAV 2018 and the ForNAV version 3.1.1460, which I don't know by heart. It's actually on the screen here in the designer. If you click download, it will generate a text file with objects for you. I've downloaded it before, so we don't have to wait for that. What you get is a text file, and in the text file is table 70,000 and a bunch of other objects that ForNAV needs in NAV. So I took the liberty of importing these objects in NAV. I'm sure most of you already know how to import text files in NAV and compile the stuff, so we don't need to wait for that. So what we need to do now is set up some information in NAV. ForNAV created a nice setup wizard for that. It will run automatically the first time you run NAV with the ForNAV objects in it, but I'm going to start it by hand now. So it wants to know where I am, which is not in North America. So I'll select other. My VAT amount specification, I have a bunch of options here. I'll choose multiple lines, and I can add payment notes and legal conditions. I can import watermarks for the document reports and for list reports. Watermarks can be used for to make a really cool looking report with letterheads and stuff like that. You can add a company logo, which I'm not going to do. We're just going to use the Cronus logo today. Then, as I said, ForNAV comes with a beautiful set of pre-configured, pre-built reports. So, do you want to replace the standard NAV reports? Yes, of course I do. And do you want to create a Fields web service? The Fields web service is something that is needed in the ForNAV designer in order to read information from the NAV database. I'm just going to close it now. I have everything set up to make sure everything works for this webinar. So if I now go to my ForNAV designer, hit settings, I have my default table information. This is the web service that ForNAV just created. I can test it while that's available. So that's cool. And in the NIV tab, I add my database server and my database name and the location of my FinSQL executable. So with that done and out of the way, we can start creating reports. So again, I go to the New button, and now I select Report Templates. There's a couple there that you can get started with. We won't let you get started with nothing unless you want to use the empty template. You can use a header line template, an item inventory template, or a list template, which is what we're going to be using today. So if we select this, we get a nice report with a margin top, bottom, left, and right. We have a list, a header, a body, and a footer. And you can see it's got some fields already there. So the first thing I want to do is save this object in the NAV database. And to do that, I go to the properties for the ForNAV report, which are on the bottom right. I want to give the object a name, customer top 10, which also gives away what I'm going to build. And object number is 50,000, and that's fine because I'm using a blank, brand new demo database. So I'm just going to save this in NAV. And when that's done, I'm going to close the report designer. We'll have a quick look at how it looks in NAV. If I go to my reports, you see I have my customer top 10 list here. It has just been created some seconds ago, and it has a ForNAV version list on it. So if you run this, you actually run the object in the NAV database, hit preview, and we see here a customer top 10 list with 4 pages. It gives me the Kronos logo, the report name. As you can see here, I'm running a ForNAV trial version, so I just download it and start working with it. And at the bottom, there's some there's the company address of Kronos and some other bits and bobs. So when we go into the NAV object, what does this look like? Well, that's quite simple. We have a report with a single data item, which is customer. Name of the data item is list. And at the end of this webinar, I'm actually going to tell you why we call it list and why we don't call it customer. So that's a nice little treat that we're going to keep for you. We have no need of columns. ForNAV picks up all that stuff out of the NAV database, so no need to bother around with that. Makes the reports nice and easy and clean, easy to read. Now there's a couple of ways I can start and design this report. I can just go with view and layout and start designing it in the report designer. I can export the report as a text object and import it in the ForNAV designer and design it that way. But that's a lot of work. I'm just going to run the report. And you can see at the top we have a nice fancy button called Open Designer. This is a control that's only visible if you have the ForNAV designer installed on your system. So users won't see this usually. And if you hit preview, my report is opened in the ForNAV designer. Really cool feature if you're designing reports this way is you get a preview button and you can just preview the report from the designer. So you don't need to run the object from Object Designer or go through the NAV client or anything. So one thing that's curious, I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger so we can all see. We get fields out of the company information, but we haven't got a company information data item. So how does this work? Well, this is where the magic of ForNAV comes in. We have on the report properties, we have an option called record. And if you open this, you can see that I have added a single record to my report. I've added the company information. You can add any table from NAV if you like. So you can add the item table, and the item fields will be available in your report. I'm just going to cancel this. I'm not going to need this. So it's nice that you can get the fields, but where does the report get its data from at runtime? Well, there's an OnPreReport trigger here, which is going to be very familiar to a lot of you NAV people. And on this, we actually have a bit of code. This is JavaScript, which has been added to look like CAL. We have other webinars that delve deeper into the whole JavaScript thing and what you can do with it. For now, I'm just going to tell you that you can do a company information.get, and you can do a company information.calc fields, and that gets the company information from my NAV database without me having to define a data item or anything. So that's really cool. That means that an end user creating a report can actually add data items and stuff to their report without having to bother with going through a partner or editing the report in the object designer. So we'll have a look around at what else we have on the screen. We see here a ... name. This is the ... bit is something to make the report easier to read. You can see on the page that we actually have quite a small control. And if I check what the source expression is, it's QueryReport.page. QueryReport is chopped off and represented as a ... So you can all read what is said here. So now we're here, we can start adding some extra boxes, some extra bits and bobs on the report. So on the left, I can add a control. I'm just going to add a text box, which I'm going to add here. You can see the purple lines. They are used to snap my new objects, new fields to the existing fields. Really useful. It allows for you to really line the fields up really nicely all across the report. So I have a new text box here, and if I want to add a source expression to this, I go to my little square button, and with the assist edit, go to my fields list and pick something of my QueryReport. QueryReport are a load of fields that are pre-configured that will be used in a lot of reports. We have a lot of standard captions. Standard captions are just text fields that are translated in or pre-translated in a number of languages. So if you want to use a subtotal, don't need to type it in the text box and add a translation. You can just add, I'm going to did it again. You can just add subtotal and it will be displayed and translated as needed. If I want a subtotal, I need to double click it and then OK. So there's that. I can hit the preview button without saving it, and there we have a subtotal. So really cool so far. So we're going to show you some more even cooler features. So another way, and perhaps the quickest way to add fields, is just select them straight from the field list. Here we have all the fields that we have, and I can just hit another field, and there it is. Right, now it's time to add some actual data to the list. We want to report with a bit of customer information on it. So let's do this. We select from list. Again, I told you before, list is customer. From list, I'm going to select the number, N. There we go. I'm going to select the name. Make that a bit bigger. You see it also snaps to the objects in other parts of the report. And let me just add the balance LCY. There we go. Hit preview again. And now we get something interesting. He said you have, the designer says you have changed the dataset for the report, and therefore you must save the changes to the report object in NAV. Why does it say this? It does this because balance LCY is a flow field, and to calculate a flow field, some of the something needs to be added to the NAV object. So it wants to do this. So let's do that and run the preview. And you see I have my customer number, customer name, and the balance. Again, without writing any CL code, now I have flow fields on my page. So this adding fields in a haphazard way is a bit haphazard. I want to do this in a slightly more interesting way. So let's add a table. In order to add a table, all you need to do is select a couple of fields with the control button pressed. You can't see it, but I am pressing the control button, as you can see, because the fields remain selected. I'm going to add the address and the balance LCY. I'm going to drag all this in a report designer, and you see here it actually adds a nice table for me. And if I hit preview, then you see I have a nice table. So obviously we need to work on our spacing of the columns. So let's do that. Make this one a bit smaller. Make this one a bit smaller. So that's nice, but again, it's not standard tables are not really readable. What we like is a nice even and odd style. So I'm just going to add a new style for the odd rows, and they get the background color Gainsborough. So we have that there. Preview the report. You see the columns are nicely spaced, and the rows are nicely readable because they've got different styles, even and odd rows. To finish it off, we'll add a column header. For the column header, I'll use the field captions from list. This gets all the captions from the NAV database. No need to mess about with trying to fetch that from wherever they need to be gotten. They're just right here. So once again, I'm going to use number, name, address, and balance LCY. Drag this in my header. And I'll just space my columns out again. You can see how easy that works with the purple rulers. So once I have that, I can give them a bit of a styling. Let's make them bold and a bit bigger. And let's, in the table properties, add some borders. Let's add all of them except the bottom. And preview again. And there we have a nice report with a header and a header for our table and some nice columns. What we have now is a really cool list, only the address is, well, it's not a complete address, is it? It's just the content of the first address field of the customer's table. When you want to add an address, the entire address in NAV, you need to go mess about with Code Unit 365 and format the address and, well, add loads of code and other complicated stuff. Don't want to do that. I don't need to. ForNAV is built specifically for NAV, and it recognizes the design patterns that NAV uses. And one of the design patterns NAV uses is the address pattern. ForNAV recognizes that there's an address 1 and an address 2 and a postcode and city and all that stuff, and it brings them together in a field group called address. So I can just take this and drag it into my table. And if I now select the properties for this cell, you see I've now got list field groups.address. So I don't need to mess about. Don't need to add any code. I can just preview this again. And you see I've got the complete address. Now this is a bit squashed up. As you can see, there's not enough room to display the entire address. ForNAV has a beautiful feature called Can Grow, which will make your table rows grow automatically. We covered that extensively in another video, so I'm not going to now. But if you want to find it, you can on our YouTube channel. Right, so we have a pretty nice report now. The only thing we still have is a lot of customers with a zero balance, and the customers are, well, they're not sorted the way I want them. I want the customers to be sorted according to the balance. I want the customers with the biggest balance to be at the top. So going into my report explorer, select list, and on my list on the properties of my list, I can add some stuff to my data item. I showed you before that we have a data item called list, which is hooked into table customer, and it has no sorting whatsoever. So let's change that. Let's make the sorting descending, and let's have it sorted on the balance LCY. As you can see, you can sort on all the fields that are available in your customer table. Hit OK, hit preview. Once again, it says, listen, you've changed some stuff in the data set. I need to save this in NAV before you can run it. So let's do that. And when we run it, you see the highest balances are first. Then most of the list is not important to me. I just want the 10 most important ones. So I changed max iteration to 10 and hit preview again. Once again, save the changes in the NAV database. And now I just have my 10 customers with the highest balance. So I have a customer top 10 list. So what have I just done? Let's just have a quick look in the object in NAV. We go and design this and select the properties of my data item. You can see it now has sorting, order descending, and it has a max iteration of 10. All added from the ForNAV designer. No need to mess about with the NAV objects. Then we come to yet another very cool feature. Let's say we want the payment terms of this customer. Obviously, the payment terms code is a field in the customer table. Just need to go and find it. Payment terms code. I can just add it to my report. Hit preview. Now it looks a bit, because I didn't add it in the table, it looks a bit weird, but it actually has payment method LM, LM, 1M, etc. Now, I'm not a computer, I can't read codes. I have no idea what LM means. So I want to add the description of the payment terms. Now in NAV, you need to add a link to the payment terms table and do a find first in order to get the description, which is a lot of work. And the ForNAV people kindly supplied us with a way of not having to do all the work. They added field lookups to fields that are very often used. So I have a payment terms code on my customer table. So they added for me the payment terms description. So I'm just going to add that here. Make it a bit bigger so we can read it and preview it. And it actually says LM loopmaand, which is Dutch for current month. I'm using a Dutch demo database because I want to show to you what it looks like if we translate this stuff. I'm just going to close the report designer and switch my language to Dutch. Once I have done that, I can run the report again. And hit preview. And there we have the report all translated into Dutch. It now says number, naam, adres, and saldo, which are the Dutch translations for the fields I had there earlier. Well, those of you who don't speak Dutch will have to take my word for it. It actually works. And once you downloaded your preview version, you can actually try it in any language of your choice. So we have that. Now, what if we mess up? What if we use a source expression that doesn't exist, like report.name1 doesn't exist? I get an error in my output where my report name should be, and I get a second page on my report, and this page actually says you have an error because you have an unknown identifier per report.name1. So that's useful if you if there's something that doesn't work properly, it'll actually tell you what went wrong. So you can fix it like this, and everything will work again. So coming up to the end of this webinar, nearly talked about ForNAV for half an hour, and I can talk about ForNAV for half a day further, but I won't take up that much of your time. I promised you I would show you why we called it list instead of customer. Well, if I save this report, say I make it report 50,001, let's do something really wild and call it vendor.10. So let's change my data source to vendor and save this and run this. You can see I can actually get my vendor.10 with my vendors, numbers, addresses, and their balances. And this works because there are a lot of fields similar in the vendor and the customer table. So you can just change the data item table, and you can run a report for the vendors. Now, obviously, you can call it customer, and it will still work if you change the data source to vendor, but it will look a bit silly in the designer. So this is all I have time for today. So you just saw that without writing a single line of CAL code and using only the ForNAV designer, we can create a fantastic looking report in a couple of minutes. It took me 10, 20 minutes perhaps to create a gorgeous report, all whilst talking to you guys. ForNAV knows and understands the NAV data model and design patterns like no other report designer because it was built with NAV in mind from day one by a team of specialists that have a century of NAV experience, and I'm not exaggerating there. It's a really cool product. I love working with it, and I'm sure you will too.
ForNAV is here to help you with reports. We are ready to talk. Are you?